Alrighty, welcome everyone to the ASA Committee on Law and Justice Statistics second webinar in our new series. We'll schedule approximately 3 to 4 30-minute webinars throughout the year, so do keep an eye out for future webinars upcoming this summer and in the fall. I'm pleased to introduce Simon Cole for the second session on counting exonerations using the National Registry of Exonerations. I'll keep my introduction brief, but Simon is a professor of criminology, law, and society at University of California, Irvine. I'm going to post in the chat here in a moment a Google form so that you can fill out your contact information if you'd like to stay in the loop on future sessions like that. But with that, I'm going to ask Simon to take it away.
Okay, thank you, Claire. I'm going to share my screen. Does that look okay, Claire? Wait, how's that?
Yep, that looks great.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. And thank you for this invitation to speak to you. I've only got 30 minutes and a lot of material, so I'm going to try to move through it quickly and leave a little time for questions. But if you have other questions, feel free to just email me directly, Simon Cole at the University of California, Irvine. You should be able to find me. Happy to answer any questions that come up later. Okay. So today I've been asked to talk about the National Registry of Exonerations. And this is a comprehensive data source on U.S. exonerations. Um, we think of it as kind of a living archive of, or it is a living archive of all known exonerations in U.S. history, with emphasis on known. There's some that we still don't know about, and an emphasis on living that we're constantly updating and adding to that archive. So it is an online website. We've just launched a new version of the website, which you can see on the left here. And just try. Um, so currently on that website, we have more than 4,000 exoneration cases from US history. And one marker of the success of the registry is the other registries that are beginning to appear around the world, that this is a good idea that other countries are doing as well. So there's a European one that was recently launched. There was a UK one, and there's a Canadian one also recently launched. And the registry is a source of information for findings that you may have heard of if you're interested in law and justice, things like the number of wrongly convicted people who pled guilty, um, policy changes like bans in some states against lying to juvenile suspects in order to get them to confess that were assisted. The lobbying efforts were assisted by our data. The proportion of the wrongly convicted who are Black being higher than the proportion of people convicted of those crimes who are Black. Um, and things like which states or counties have the highest number of exonerations, both absolute and per capita. So these are just some of kinds of statistics that people use the registry to generate. All right, so because this is a audience of statisticians, I'm going to explain a little bit about the legal system. And in this schematic, I've tried to make the boxes kind of proportional to the conceptual size of the amount of people that we think these things would be subject to. So, and what I'm trying to explain here is why we count exonerations. So if you think about prosecuting people, you can think about some of them are guilty and some of them are innocent. Let's hope that most of them are guilty, that only a minority are innocent. Those who are innocent, let's hope that the ones who are innocent mostly get acquitted. They don't get convicted, but some of them may get convicted, and that would be a wrongful conviction of an innocent person. We think that most of those people, we never find out that they were innocent. It becomes an undetected wrongful conviction. They're not able to prove their innocence. They get no remedy. Nobody knows about this case. But a small number of them become exonerations, and that's what we count. And we count this because mainly because most people are interested in wrongful convictions, but they are sort of fundamentally unknowable and uncountable. Exonerations are something we can count. And just to look at the top part, in fact, I'll skip the top part of the diagram in the interest of time, but that sort of shows how the guilty people would sort of play out. So exonerations is for many people a kind of proxy for what most of our users are really interested in, which is wrongful convictions. But again, these can't really be counted. Um, and I want to point out, if you look back at this slide, that exonerations are in a sense an outcome of two unlikely events, right? One being wrongly convicted in the first place. We hope that that's relatively unlikely. But if you are wrongly convicted, being exonerated is also an unlikely event. Most wrongly convicted people, we are confident, are never exonerated. What is an exoneration? There is no sort of official legal definition of exoneration. It's not really a legal term. There is no legal definition. So we use a functional definition, which is designed to keep the number of false inclusions low, with an accepted cost of a high number of false exclusions, right? So we want to have a very small number of actually guilty people who we list as exonerees. And in order to do that, we're excluding a large number of people who we think are probably factually innocent, but we don't include them because they don't meet our definition. The definition looks like this. You have to be convicted of a crime. You have to be relieved of all related convictions with new evidence of innocence, individualized consideration of the case, and without physical evidence of guilt. And that is the definition that we've come up to meet that functional need of having exonerations map very closely onto factual innocence. So a couple issues conceptual issues with that definition. I want to point out first that, or it's really one issue, that we are deferring to state actors, by which I mean judges, prosecutors, executives, or juries in overturning conviction. We list someone on the registry because a state actor has overturned their conviction, not because we as scholars or researchers think that they're innocent. We don't list people or not list people on the registry because of our opinions about their guilt or innocence, right? So we are trying to remove our judgment from the process, and we are so these are people who the state itself has relieved them of their conviction. So again, because this is an audience of statisticians, it was suggested to me that you may not know as much about the legal process. On this slide, I'm showing kind of the most common route to exoneration that we see. There are many different, very complicated routes to exoneration. Every case is different in a way, but this is a typical way that this audience may not be that familiar with. So someone is convicted of a crime and they have a right to an appeal. That's often called a direct appeal. They could get their conviction overturned on the direct appeal, but most of them don't. And then there are other kinds of appeals. I'm calling it a habeas corpus appeal here, but different terms are used for further appeals. The appeals can be very complicated. At some point, that conviction is maybe again, different terms are used. Sometimes it's called reversed, sometimes it's called vacated. The conviction is erased. And if the conviction is erased in our legal system, the defendant returns to the trial court. They go back to here, and they can be retried. Um, and before or during retrial, usually the charges may be dismissed by the prosecutor or by a judge, or the jury might acquit them in the second trial. And any of those would be considered an exoneration. And the point I want to highlight is that lay people often think of an exoneration as maybe a pardon by the executive with some kind of declaration of innocence. And very few are pardons. And a lot of them don't come with some kind of official legal statement about innocence. They simply, the case is simply dismissed. So how do we find these more than 4,000 cases? A variety of ways. One is by sort of word of mouth. Attorneys or innocence organizations may let us know. At this point, many of them know who we are. Many of them don't, though. We also are sort of scraping the web for press accounts of exonerations. Compensation for exonerees is an increasingly useful source of information about exoneration cases where we didn't find out about it uh, during the exoneration, but we find out when they're awarded money by the state. And sometimes we just do kind of dragnets through legal databases looking for cases that meet our criteria. So it's a variety of ways, and certainly we miss cases all the time. People write us all the time with a case from a decade ago that we missed, we never knew about. So what do we do then? We obtain source documents. I'll talk about source documents in a second. We code the case. We code more than 100 variables. Not all of those are on the website, but here's a screenshot of the website of some of the variables that we might code. So we try to find answers to all of these kind of factual questions about the case. And then our researchers, both former professional journalists, write a narrative of the case. Um, and these narratives are often a great source of kind of details about the case. If you're interested in a particular issue, like I'm interested in forensic science, you can sort of find out the gritty details of the forensic science or whatever other issue you're interested in in the narrative. So I mentioned source documents. We use public documents, not anything that's privileged or secret. Mostly those are legal papers, legal rulings, motions, or briefs. Probably the second most common thing is news stories. Um, and relatively rare are things that a lot of people are interested in, such as trial transcripts. We have some of those, but certainly by no means in every case or even close to it. Laboratory reports, even more rare. The main point, and this is important for this audience, is the heterogeneity of these documents, that we have different documents for different cases, and both in their amount, which can range in cases from 0 documents to more than 50, and the type. And also, the registry has been operating since 2012. We the exonerations date from all years in US history. And so there's changes over time in the nature of the documents, right? They're becoming more electronic documents with more full text searchability and so on. And the older cases can be documents that were faxed uh, or things like that, sort of terms of low print quality. Uh, And so these source documents will be heterogeneous in terms of dates, the date of conviction, date of exoneration, and the date of what we call posting. That's the date we worked the case, that we posted the case, which of course might be a very different date from the date of exoneration if we learned about it late. The jurisdiction, we have a federal legal system in the United States. Different jurisdictions op operate in different ways. They produce different kinds of documents. They name them different things. The way that a person gets exonerated can introduce heterogeneity into the source documents because they can take very different routes. And the crime. Crime we have found is sort of the number one variable to control for in our data. Um, like crimes, murders are very different from drug crimes. Sexual assaults are different from financial crimes. In some sense, like crimes need to be treated with like crimes to make any good understanding of the data. So here's just an illustration of the heterogeneity of these source documents. These are two cases that I have students working on now. They are not posted in the registry yet. And just pointing out here, there's a difference in the type and the number of documents that we have for these two cases. But it's worse than that because these are the two most important and most useful documents in these two cases. And this is a trial court ruling that really is the most in-depth legal document in the case. Usually it's an appeals court ruling, but in this case, it's a trial court ruling. This is from New York, so you have another heterogeneous thing that the Supreme Court of New York is actually the lowest court, whereas it's the highest court in every other state. So you sort of have to know that. This is a very unusual document. This is a report on the right here from the Langhorne case. This is a report by a conviction integrity unit in Baltimore. It's not written by a court at all. It's the conviction integrity unit um, saying that they think this person should be exonerated. And so it's a different kind of document. It's written in a different style. And notice just down here at the bottom, they're calling all the witnesses they're anonymizing all the witnesses and giving them letter names instead of their names, which you would not tend to find in a legal document. So just hold that heterogeneity in your mind till for a few minutes till I get to until I come back to it in a minute. So how can people use the registry? We we like to say at the registry, we tell stories and we count things, right? So the stories are those narratives about each case. Um, and counting things is the data and statistics that we make available. And we do mean literally count, since this is an audience of statisticians. For a lot of things, really the best thing you can do is count things. And I know that statisticians have lots of more sophisticated techniques, but in some cases, really the most meaningful thing is really just to count things. So users can use the public website. With our new website, we have more things that people can count and more filters and variables that they can combine and calculate their own numbers. They can read stories. If they find a set of stories of interest, they can get better details on them by reading the stories. We have a spreadsheet export with this button here, which exports all the public variables that we have. And in some cases, people make special requests for non-public variables or for source documents. So now we come to kind of the data caveats about this uh, data set. And in some sense, I would say it's really not a data set in the sense that you might be used to. It's not finished. It's, again, as I said, a living archive that we're constantly adding to and constantly updating when we find errors in the data or in the stories, or somebody tells us a new fact or something like that. It's been going since 2012, so there's some inconsistency over time, both in the kind of information that we get from the legal system and from the media, and in our coding practices over those that more than a decade. When the registry started, it was mostly staffed by students. We're now staffed by lawyers and former journalists. So there may be some heterogeneity in the coding practices over time. And perhaps most importantly, information limitations. We often like to say we only know what we know. We did not witness all 4,000 of these trials. We weren't there. And so things could have happened that we don't know about if they're not written about in the source documents, which are primarily legal papers that we get. And for that reason, most of the variables that we code should be regarded as undercounts, right? These are the cases in which we know that something happened, but that doesn't mean we know it didn't happen. So if we count, for example, bad eyewitness procedures, bad lineups, and so on, these are the cases where we know there was a bad lineup. But were there other cases where there was a bad lineup that didn't make it into our source documents? There may well be many of those. Um, and then there are kind of conceptual limitations. So as I mentioned earlier, most people are interested in exonerations because they're really interested in wrongful convictions, and exonerations are the thing that they can find data on. So there's always that relationship between wrongful convictions and exonerations. There's a little bit of a denominator problem in most of the statistics that people get from the registry. Often you will see a statistic like this, the number of exonerations with mistaken witness identification as a percentage of the total registry of the number of known exonerations. Um, that's a useful number, but again, it's probably not as useful as what most people would really like to know but can't know, which would be, for example, the number of eyewitnesses who are mistaken out of the number of eyewitnesses. And it's kind of an unknowable statistic. And so people are using this top statistic in lieu of that. Um, there are we find errors in our own data. There are errors, and some of our codes are a bit subjective, right? And that needs to be kept in mind in using them. So I've just used as an illustration here the relationship of the victim to the defendant. That's an interesting thing and important, but of course in real cases it kind of strains our coding system. If somebody is a rival drug dealer of the if the defendant is a rival drug dealer of the victim, does that make them a coworker, an acquaintance, a stranger? Not always clear. So because of all of these, and especially because of the heterogeneity in the source documents, um, uh, I want to end with this skeptical slide, because this is an audience of statisticians, that we tend to be skeptical of searches of our data for so-called predictors of wrongful conviction, and whether that's wanting to run a regression on the data, or an increasingly common suggestion that we see, run all our source documents through an artificial intelligence, and you'll find the predictors of wrongful convictions. And we think that's unlikely to be useful for two reasons. First, the heterogeneity of the source documents, which I gave you an illustration of, but also because of the backwards looking nature of the of exonerations. If you recall that schematic diagram of the justice system that I showed before. This is a data set of cases that have a common event that occurs at the end of the case, but that doesn't tell us, and that's where we come into the case. That's where we're getting our source documents, and we don't have as much information about what happened at the beginning of the case to lead to the wrongful conviction. So with that, I'll stop there, and I think I have 5 minutes for questions if people have some.
Thanks so much, Simon. We do have one question already in the Q&A. If folks do have questions, feel free to also put them in the Q&A as we do this first one. So Robin says, thanks for your great talk. Are there any estimates, or do you have any sense of how large the box of undiscovered innocence cases is?
Thanks, Robin. The usual answer to that is references to work by two people who work at the registry, Sam Gross and Barbara O'Brien, and their study of death penalty cases. And they're kind of offsite, which is in the proceedings of the National Academy of Science, and gives a figure of about 4%, an estimate of around 4% wrongful convictions in death penalty murder cases. Um, and the big limitation of that is, you know, can you extrapolate from death penalty murder cases to all the other kinds of cases in our legal system? But they were able to sort of control the data fairly well in that study. But other than that, if you wanted defensible estimates, it's all in kind of those serious death penalty cases. Um, the other answer that I would have, which is not a statistical one, is read some of the cases and see how lucky these people were to be exonerated. And that gives you a sense of how many other people didn't get that like chain of lucky breaks. Um, and that should give you a sense of that dark figure.
Thanks. There's another question. I don't know if you can see
Yeah.
it. Yeah. Where is
Yeah.
research
Where
exonerations
is
published?
research on exonerations published? Does that mean like journal articles and so on?
I'm guessing so, yeah.
Yeah, so there is a wrongful convictions law journal. It is kind of a niche area of scholarship in criminology. So it would tend to be published kind of all over the place, not in its own journal. But there is this wrongful convictions law journal. The Albany Law Review used to have an uh, annual issue devoted to miscarriages of justice. There are edited volumes and so on.
Yeah, another question on, do you have fields in the non-public data for the source or sources of information used to enter someone into the registry?
Uh, And so I guess the question is whether the source documents are itself a variable. No. No, we do not have that. So you can't treat yet. No. I'll just say no to that, Charles.
Are the type of source documents available?
Well, you would have to go through and look at them and code it yourself, but we have not done the job of have a variable where we say legal motion, trial court ruling, newspaper account. No. Yeah, did not do that. Um
Yeah, I can read the next one. What are some interesting
yeah, no, I
statistics?
can read it. And I
Okay.
know Maria. Yeah. Well, Maria, I tried to put some statistics on that first slide, that second slide. Any of the contributing factors, right? So the percentage of exonerations that to which false confessions contributed, the percentage to which mistaken witness identification contributed. Those are all things of interest. Can you extrapolate to anything external to exonerations? Um, I'm not sure. This is uh I always have Maria always asks interesting questions, and we always have to have a couple go rounds till I figure out what she's asking. So this may be one of those.
I think we might only have time for one more question, and I think Loki's question might be
Okay.
similar to Maria's. So maybe we'll go to, do states with innocence orgs have higher rates of exonerations?
Great question. I don't know. And that is knowable. So we have codes for innocence organizations. It's a case characteristic, and we have the states. So you could do a study and figure that out. Now, most states do have innocence organizations. Some, like California, have more than one, and some are regional, right? So the Midwest Innocence Project covers like 4 or 5 states, and I think the Great North Innocence Project covers a couple states. So, but yeah, that's a good example of an answerable question.
In the innocence case, that variable you were just talking about, that's a public
Yeah, it would
piece
be
of
called innocence
information.
organization. And well,
Okay.
that's a code for whether an innocence organization contributed to the exoneration. For what sorry, what the questioner was asking, you would really just need the information on the states, and then you'd need to make your own kind of coding scheme of what states are covered by innocence organizations.
Great. Okay, well, I think that might be all the time we have. I want to be respectful of people's time. So thank you so much, Simon, for taking the time to talk to us about this really interesting data set. I'd encourage folks to keep the conversation going if you have other questions. And yeah, we'll keep an eye out for future law and justice statistics webinars in the coming months. But thank you all for coming today. And thanks again to Simon for taking the time.
Thank you. Feel free to email me if you have more questions.
Have a good afternoon, everyone.